My best friend was dumped by his girlfriend, after which my fiancée cheated on me with him right before the wedding where I exposed them both. Hey Reddit, throwaway account here because, well, I don't really want this tied back to my main, and honestly, I just need to vent. So, let me set the scene. My fiancée, Emily, and I had been together for almost 5 years. We were one of those couples people described as meant to be, the kind everyone thought would go the distance. You know, family barbecues, game nights with friends, the whole picture-perfect life everyone expects. I thought I'd found the person I was going to grow old with. And she was amazing, supportive, funny, beautiful, everything I could have wanted. So, naturally, after years of being in sync, I proposed, and she said yes. I had my whole life mapped out with her, and things seemed right. But here's where things get messy. My best friend, Jake, had been going through an ugly breakup. He and his girlfriend of 3 years had split up pretty suddenly, and the guy was wrecked. Jake and I have been close since high school, one of those friendships where you don't need to explain much, you just get each other. He's been like a brother to me, and I didn't think twice about letting him crash on my couch when he needed it. At the time, I thought it was just temporary, just until he found his feet. Emily was totally cool with it too. She'd always been the kind of person who liked to help people and had a soft spot for him, so when Jake started spending more time at our place, she even offered to check in on him when I was working late. It seemed like a win-win. Jake would get some much-needed support, and we'd be there for him like he'd always been for me. But then, things started to shift in ways I couldn't quite put my finger on. At first, I brushed it off as my imagination, Jake coming over even when I wasn't around, spending more time hanging out with Emily than me. He just needs a friend, I kept telling myself. And it's not like I can be around all the time, right? I was working long hours, and I honestly thought maybe it was nice for him to have Emily's company during the day. But then, I started noticing little things that didn't sit right. Like, I'd come home and find the two of them sitting close on the couch, laughing at inside jokes that I wasn't a part of. They seemed to be sharing more looks than I remembered, those little glances that used to be just for me. And then one day, something happened that changed everything. I had just walked in the door after a brutal day at work. As I was setting down my stuff, I heard Jake say something to Emily from the living room. He called her, babe. My whole body tensed up, and I immediately froze in the doorway. They both went quiet for a second, and then he started chuckling, trying to play it off like it was some kind of joke. But I saw the look on Emily's face, she was embarrassed, maybe even a little nervous. I felt like my stomach dropped right out of me. Jake looked at me with this awkward smile, muttering something about it being a slip-up, just a joke, but his laugh sounded forced, and Emily looked, well, not like herself. I tried to shake it off, tried to believe them when they both laughed it off as nothing. But in that split second, I felt like a fool standing there, watching them laugh at my expense. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But that look they shared, the look that used to be just between her and me, it felt wrong, like something had already been broken. And even though I wanted to ignore it, to tell myself I was overreacting, I knew deep down that something wasn't right. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was going on between them. Every time I walked into a room and saw Jake and Emily together, I felt like I was intruding on something I shouldn't be seeing. They'd both act perfectly normal around me, but I started noticing things I'd probably ignored before. It was little stuff at first, stuff I tried to brush off. Like the way Jake's visits became longer and more frequent, to the point where he'd sometimes show up at my place even before I got home from work. I'd walk in and find them on the couch, watching movies together, laughing like they were having the time of their lives. One Saturday, I got stuck at the office dealing with a major project deadline. I didn't get home until late, way past dinner. I was exhausted, but the second I opened the door and saw them together, all that tiredness disappeared. They were sitting close on the couch, way closer than what felt right. Jake had his arm stretched out behind her, not quite touching her shoulders, but close enough that it made my skin crawl. I must have made some kind of noise when I walked in because they both turned to look at me, their faces flushed with the kind of surprise that didn't look innocent. "Oh, hey," Emily said, a little too cheerfully, like she was trying to cover up the awkwardness of the moment. She got up to greet me, but her smile seemed forced. "Jake brought over takeout, so we saved you some if you're hungry." I tried to smile back, but something about the whole thing just felt off. I mumbled a thanks and walked into the kitchen, needing a moment alone to clear my head. As I opened the fridge, I couldn't stop myself from wondering if they'd looked like that the whole night, sitting close, maybe even cuddling, while I was busting my ass at work. Things only got weirder from there. Every time I tried to talk to Emily about Jake, she'd shrug it off like it was no big deal. She'd say things like, "Jake's just going through a hard time," or, "He doesn't have anyone else, you know." I wanted to believe her. I told myself that they were just friends, that she was just being supportive. But that nagging feeling kept gnawing at me, whispering that maybe I was being lied to. Then one night, everything almost came crashing down. I was up late scrolling through my phone in bed, unable to sleep. Emily was asleep beside me, or at least I thought she was. Around midnight, her phone buzzed with a text. I wasn't the type to snoop, but in that moment, I couldn't help but look. It was a message from Jake, "Can't stop thinking about earlier. You looked amazing today, babe." I felt like the ground had just dropped out from under me. I stared at Jake's message, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. My heart was pounding so hard I was afraid it might wake Emily. I glanced over at her, fast asleep, looking so peaceful and innocent. But in my mind, all I could see was that message on her phone. Babe. That word echoed over and over in my head. I don't know how long I sat there, just staring, trying to process what I'd just read. Part of me wanted to wake her up right then and there and demand an explanation. But I felt paralyzed, trapped between rage and disbelief. I needed answers, but I also needed a plan. I knew that if I confronted her, I'd have to be ready for whatever came next, no matter how ugly it got. The next morning, I tried to act normal, but it felt impossible. My mind kept replaying everything I'd seen, and I was hyper-aware of every interaction between her and Jake. Every little glance, every time she checked her phone, every time she laughed at one of his dumb jokes, it all felt like confirmation of what I'd read. That night, after dinner, I couldn't take it anymore. I told Emily we needed to talk. She looked a little startled but agreed, sitting down across from me on the couch. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Emily," I started, "is there anything going on with you and Jake?" She blinked, caught off guard. "What? No, of course not. Why would you even think that?" I hesitated, deciding whether or not to reveal what I'd seen. Instead, I went with something more subtle. "It's just. I feel like he's around all the time. Like, even when I'm not here. You two seem really close." Her face softened, and she tried to reach for my hand, but I pulled back. "Hey, he's just a friend. You know he's going through a lot. I'm just being there for him, that's all." She let out a little laugh, like it was all so obvious. "You're being paranoid." I bit my tongue, feeling my frustration boiling over. "Paranoid? Emily, I'm not an idiot. I've seen the way you two look at each other. And then last night, I saw a message from him on your phone. He called you, babe. Care to explain that?" Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she was completely silent. I could see the gears turning in her head as she tried to come up with something to say. Finally, she forced a laugh, but it sounded hollow. "Oh my God, you're really going through my messages now? That's insane. I mean, babe. It's just a joke between us. You know how Jake is, he doesn't mean anything by it." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "A joke? Emily, he said he couldn't stop thinking about you." She rolled her eyes, her tone shifting to something almost condescending. "Look, you're blowing this way out of proportion. Jake needed someone, and I was just being a friend. That's all there is to it." But I wasn't buying it, not anymore. I knew, deep down, that something was happening between them, whether she was ready to admit it or not. And in that moment, as I watched her fumble for excuses, I felt my own resolve hardening. After that conversation, things didn't just settle down. If anything, my suspicions grew stronger. Emily kept insisting that nothing was going on, but every time I brought it up, she'd either deflect, laugh it off, or get defensive. And Jake? He started acting distant whenever I was around, which only added fuel to my suspicions. They were both pretending nothing was wrong, but I could feel it, like this heavy weight pressing down on me every time I walked into the room. So, I decided to do something I never thought I'd do. I set a trap. One Friday, I told Emily I had to stay late at work, which wasn't unusual. She gave me a quick kiss goodbye, acting perfectly normal, maybe even a little too normal. As I drove away, my stomach twisted with anxiety. I wasn't proud of what I was doing, but I couldn't live with the constant doubt. I needed to see, with my own eyes, what was really going on between them. I parked my car a few blocks away and walked back toward our house, keeping out of sight as I approached. My heart was racing, but I forced myself to stay calm. I needed a clear head to see this through. When I finally reached the house, I slipped around the side yard to where I could get a view through the living room window without being noticed. What I saw confirmed everything I'd feared. Jake was there, sitting on the couch with Emily, closer than ever. They were talking, but it wasn't the kind of conversation friends have. It was intense, like they were caught up in their own little world. And then, without even a second of hesitation, she leaned into him, and he wrapped his arms around her. They sat like that, locked together, not a trace of guilt on their faces. I felt my entire body go numb. There it was, right in front of me, the proof I'd needed. My best friend and my fiancée, tangled up in something they'd been lying to me about all along. I took a deep breath and forced myself to calm down, as much as I could. This wasn't how I was going to confront them. Not like this, not yet. If I burst in right then, I'd give them the chance to twist the story, to explain it away. No, I wanted something they couldn't deny, a public reckoning, a final act that would make them face what they'd done to me. And that's when I knew exactly how I was going to do it. I was going to wait until our wedding day. After that night, everything changed. I felt like I was living a lie, but I was determined to play my part until the perfect moment to expose them. I knew I had to act like everything was fine, as if I had no idea what was going on between them. So, I went back to pretending I was just a clueless fiancé, thrilled to be getting married to the love of his life. Inside, though, every interaction felt like a bitter reminder of their betrayal, and every laugh we shared twisted the knife a little deeper. The hardest part was acting normal around Jake. The guy who'd been like a brother to me, who'd been there through thick and thin, who I thought I could trust with anything. Now I could barely look at him without feeling rage bubbling up. But I forced myself to keep it together, to keep acting like I was happy to see him. It was exhausting, but I kept reminding myself that it would all be worth it in the end. To make sure my plan went smoothly, I threw myself into wedding preparations. I was involved in everything, venue details, seating arrangements, music choices, just to make sure that no one suspected anything was amiss. Emily, of course, thought I was just being an attentive groom, invested in the big day, and she seemed genuinely pleased that I was so engaged. Ironically, my commitment to our wedding just convinced her more that she was getting away with it. Then there was the guest list. I made sure both our families, close friends, and everyone important to us would be there. I wanted a full house for the show I had in mind. Emily's parents, who adored her, were coming in from out of state, and my family was thrilled for us, none of them suspecting a thing. I even made sure Jake would have a front row seat to the disaster he'd helped create. As the wedding day approached, I rehearsed exactly how it would go down. I kept imagining different scenarios, what I would say, the look on their faces when I exposed the truth, how everyone would react. It was probably the only thing that kept me going through those long weeks of pretending. I replayed the scene over and over in my mind, refining the details until I had everything planned down to the last second. Finally, the big day arrived. The venue was decorated, the guests were seated, and everyone was ready for a beautiful wedding. My heart was pounding, but not from excitement. I was fueled by the knowledge that, in just a little while, they would know exactly what I'd known for weeks. This wasn't going to be the wedding Emily and Jake had imagined, it was going to be a reckoning. I can't describe the mix of emotions as I stood there at the altar, watching everything come together just as we'd planned. Guests filled the pews, dressed to the nines, all smiling and murmuring to each other as they waited for the ceremony to begin. I saw my family in the crowd, my mom dabbing her eyes with a tissue, my dad looking proud. Emily's parents were there too, beaming from their front row seats, blissfully unaware of what was about to unfold. Then, I heard the soft music start to play, the cue that Emily was coming down the aisle. I straightened up, trying to keep my expression calm, to keep my breathing steady. This was it, the beginning of the end. Emily appeared at the back of the aisle, looking stunning in her white dress, her veil gently framing her face. I'd always pictured this moment as one of the happiest of my life, the moment I'd see her walking toward me to start our life together. But now, all I felt was a cold, simmering anger mixed with anticipation. I had to admit, she looked perfect, but knowing what I knew, it felt like watching a stranger. She walked toward me, her eyes bright, a soft smile on her face. She looked happy, like she was genuinely excited to be marrying me. The whole thing felt surreal, like I was watching a scene from someone else's life. How could she stand there, looking so radiant and innocent, knowing what she'd been doing behind my back? When she finally reached me, she took my hands in hers, looking up at me with what I could only imagine was practiced sincerity. I kept my face as neutral as possible, offering a smile that didn't reach my eyes. She probably thought I was just nervous, maybe a little overwhelmed by the moment. If only she knew. The officiant began, welcoming everyone and talking about love, commitment, and the strength of marriage. I couldn't focus on the words, though. I was too busy counting down to the moment I'd reveal everything. I glanced out of the corner of my eye and saw Jake, standing among the groomsmen, looking calm and collected. He even gave me a supportive smile, like he was my best man instead of my betrayer. Finally, the officiant looked at me, signaling it was time for my vows. I'd written them weeks ago, back when I thought I'd be declaring my love to the person I trusted most. But now, those words were just lines in a play, part of a setup for what I was really about to say. I cleared my throat, looking directly at Emily as I began. Emily, from the moment we met, I thought I knew you. I thought I'd found the person who would stand by me through anything, who would always be honest, always be faithful. Her smile grew, and she gave my hands a gentle squeeze, but I kept going, my voice steady and my expression turning cold. I thought you were the one I could trust with my heart, the one I could build a life with, no matter what. But as it turns out, I was wrong. A hush fell over the crowd. I could feel every eye on me, hear the uncomfortable rustling as people exchanged confused glances. Emily's smile wavered, her eyes widening as she realized this wasn't going to be a typical set of vows. I glanced out at the guests, making sure I had everyone's attention. Then I turned to face Jake, standing among the groomsmen, his face suddenly paling. For once, his confident smirk was gone, replaced by a look of shock and dread. He knew. He knew I was about to expose them both. Jake, I said, my voice carrying across the room, I want to thank you for showing me the truth before it was too late. For showing me who Emily really is and what kind of person you really are. Because if it hadn't been for you, I might never have known what was happening right under my nose. People turned to look at Jake, a ripple of confusion spreading as they tried to piece together what I was saying. Jake's face was a mask of horror, his mouth slightly open as if he wanted to deny it, but he didn't say a word. Finally, I turned back to Emily, my voice cold. Emily, I know everything. I know about you and Jake, every lie, every excuse, every late night, when you thought I'd never find out. But I did. Emily gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as the color drained from her face. She shook her head, stumbling over her words. No, it's not, please, let's talk about this, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the stunned silence of our guests. I could hear her mom's faint "oh my God" from the front row, and my own mother's hand was clamped over her heart, staring at me in disbelief. The guests were whispering now, the tension rising as the reality of my words sank in. I shook my head slowly, my tone final. No, Emily. We're done talking. I trusted you, I loved you, and you chose to betray me with the one person I thought I could trust. So, no, we're not having a wedding today. Turning back to the guests, I said, thank you all for coming. There won't be a wedding, but there's plenty of food and drink, so please, enjoy yourselves. Consider it a celebration of dodging a bullet. With that, I gave one last look at Emily, who was standing there frozen, tears streaming down her face. And then, without another word, I walked out, leaving her to face the consequences of her choices in front of everyone we knew. As I walked down the aisle alone, I could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on me, a mixture of shock, pity, and disbelief. Behind me, I heard scattered whispers, gasps, even a few muffled sobs. My heart was pounding, but each step felt lighter than the last. With every footfall, I was leaving behind the lies, the betrayal, and the people who tore my life apart. By the time I reached the double doors, the commotion behind me had erupted into chaos. I could hear Emily calling my name, her voice choked and desperate, but I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. Let her face them. Let her explain herself to her family, her friends, everyone who had thought they knew her. For once, she'd have to deal with the consequences without me by her side. I stepped outside, feeling the crisp air hit me, a strange contrast to the tension and heat inside the hall. For a moment, I just stood there, taking in the fresh air, letting the silence replace the whirlwind of emotions from inside. The sound of birds chirping, the gentle rustle of leaves, it all felt surreal, like I was waking up from a nightmare. Then, I heard hurried footsteps behind me. I turned, half expecting Emily, maybe even Jake, but it was my mom. She was breathless, her face filled with worry, confusion, and a hint of pride. She reached out, pulling me into a hug, and for a moment, I just let myself sink into it, the way I hadn't since I was a kid. "Oh, honey," she whispered, holding me tightly. "I had no idea. I'm so sorry." I pulled back, managing a weak smile. "I'm just glad I found out now," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Better now than after I said, I do, right?" She nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. "You're right. But, what will you do now?" That was a question I hadn't fully answered for myself. All I knew was that I couldn't go back in there, couldn't pretend that life could just go on as it had. Everything had changed. But in that moment, I didn't have to have all the answers. I just had to keep moving forward, one step at a time. "I'll figure it out," I told her. "Right now, I just need to get out of here." With a final hug, she let me go, nodding her understanding. "If you need anything, we're here," she said softly. And with that, I walked away. Away from the betrayal, the hurt, and the people who had broken my trust. I didn't know what was waiting for me on the other side, but I knew that whatever it was better than going back in there. The days following the wedding that never was were a whirlwind of emotions and awkward conversations. Word spread fast, and I started getting messages almost immediately after I walked out. Friends, family members, even old classmates were reaching out, offering their sympathy, their shock, or, in some cases, their disbelief. Emily's parents were some of the first to contact me. They were devastated, torn between supporting their daughter and grappling with the harsh reality of what she'd done. Her mom left me a voicemail, nearly in tears, apologizing on Emily's behalf, saying they had no idea and were so sorry. A part of me almost felt bad for them. They believed they were gaining a son-in-law, and now they were left to pick up the pieces of their daughter's shattered reputation. Then, there was Jake. Jake tried calling me multiple times, leaving voicemails filled with apologies, excuses, attempts to explain himself. He begged me to meet up, just to talk, but I wasn't about to give him the satisfaction. In one message, he stammered through an apology, claiming that he'd never meant for any of this to happen, that he'd been going through a rough time and got lost. But nothing he could say would erase what I saw that night through the window, or that message he'd sent her. I deleted each message as soon as I listened, refusing to let his words have any hold over me. Emily reached out, too. At first, her messages were full of apologies, desperate pleas for forgiveness. She claimed that she'd made a terrible mistake, that she still loved me and wanted a chance to make things right. I ignored her messages, but they kept coming. Eventually, they took on a different tone, blaming me for humiliating her in front of everyone we knew. According to her, I'd been cruel and unfair, and if I'd really loved her, I would have handled things privately. That only made it clearer to me that I'd made the right choice. I realized she wasn't sorry for what she did, she was just sorry she'd been caught. What surprised me most was how many people actually reached out to say they admired what I'd done. I hadn't planned on gaining anyone's respect, I just wanted to take a stand, to take back some control. But friends told me they respected my strength, my courage, and that seeing me walk away had shown them something about standing up for themselves. I never expected to feel like I'd done something powerful, but in their eyes, I had. In the end, though, what mattered most was that I felt free. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was living a lie. I didn't feel weighed down by suspicion, or haunted by doubts. I had my family, I had friends who supported me, and I had my dignity. I may not have known exactly where I was headed next, but I knew one thing for sure, I was finally moving forward, and I wasn't looking back. It's been a few months now since the day that changed everything, and I can finally say that I'm starting to feel like myself again. The first few weeks were tough. I had days where the anger and hurt felt overwhelming, where I'd catch myself wondering how things might have been different if Emily and Jake hadn't betrayed me. But each day, it got a little easier to breathe, a little easier to focus on what was ahead instead of what was behind. In a strange way, confronting the truth has given me a kind of strength I didn't know I had. I'd always been someone who put others first, who tried to make everyone happy, but now I realize there's a difference between kindness and self-sacrifice. I needed to be kinder to myself. So I made a few changes, focusing on what I wanted for my own life, something I hadn't done in a long time. I reconnected with old friends I'd drifted from, friends who reminded me of who I was before Emily, before all the lies. I started going to the gym regularly, pouring all that pent-up frustration into something constructive. I even took a short trip by myself, just to clear my head and remind myself that there's a big world out there waiting for me. Emily and Jake are still together, or so I've heard from mutual friends. As for me, I haven't spoken to either of them since. I don't know if I ever will. I thought about forgiveness, about how people say you have to forgive to move on. But I think sometimes moving on just means accepting what happened, learning from it, and choosing not to carry it with you. Through everything, my family has been there for me. My mom still checks in on me a little too often, but I know it's because she worries. My dad's quiet support has been just as steady. Knowing they have my back has been a huge part of what's helped me through this. Looking back, I can see the warning signs I missed, the red flags I ignored because I wanted to believe the best about the people I loved. But I'm not bitter, and I'm not letting those memories turn me into someone cynical or closed off. I know one day I'll find someone who values loyalty and honesty as much as I do. Until then, I'm just focused on being the best version of myself. It's strange, but as painful as this whole experience was, I wouldn't change it. I learned more about myself, about what I deserve, and about what it means to stand up for myself. And for that, I'm grateful. To anyone reading this who's been betrayed, who's felt that gut-wrenching loss, know this, you're stronger than you think. You can get through it, and there's a whole life waiting for you on the other side of the pain. It's not easy, but it's worth it. Thanks for listening, Reddit. It feels good to finally put this all out there and close this chapter for good.